looking at the sale of intoxicating hemp products in Texas and what needs to be done about the sale of these products, and also, in particular, marketing these products to children. A lot of issues we need to discuss here, and so we're going to start with the three invited witnesses. And the chair calls Dr. Timothy Stevenson, Dr. Robert Emick, Mr. Mark Melson. Come on down, you guys. Have a seat. Thank you for waiting. A lot of big stuff today. This is an important one, so thank you for being here. When you're ready, when you're comfortable, introduce yourself and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, Senators. Tim Stevenson, Department of State Health Services, Consumer Protection Division, on the charge. And just wanted to start with some background on the legislation that brought consumable hemp. Of course, all of this started in late 2018 with the National Farm Bill, Federal Farm Bill, December 2018. In the 2019 session, Texas passed a bill to allow Texas to have our own act to control hemp. And the Federal Farm Bill, again, context is important. It carved out a distinction in the definition from marijuana to allow hemp with low levels of THC, specifically listed was Delta-9 THC, to be excluded from the definition of marijuana to help with agriculture and other growing practices, and again in the Farm Bill. So we had our Texas Agricultural Code passed the Texas version of the Farm Bill, how to control hemp, basically lifting the definition of hemp out of the federal. It's very, very similar definition there, just one word different or two words different related to the seeds of the plant. So then in the 2021 session, Texas responded quickly, passed a bill. Then we, in the Department of Health State Services, we had passed a rule effective August of 2020 to implement the consumable hemp program. In that, again, I think it's important to focus a little bit on the definition. The carve out for hemp, Delta-9 THC is specifically listed, can't exceed 0.3% dry weight basis for hemp and hemp products. It does not, the definition doesn't list all the other isomers and all the other types of THCs that might be added back to the product. It specifically doesn't list Delta-8, and there are other isomers of THC and other products that have similar pharmacologic activities that it doesn't list. The department maintains that with hemp you can't set the cap of 0.3 THC and then synthesize other THCs and add those back into the product and sell it as hemp. We maintained that, and when we started implementing that, we got enjoined in a lawsuit that with an injunction so that we couldn't enforce that. And that action is still in the courts, heading to the Texas Supreme Court ultimately. It's interesting, consumable hemp products, so anything that we would be eating, and our department deals with food ingredients, things that we eat. But interestingly, smokable products fall under that as well. If it's a smokable hemp product, again, under the 0.3 of Delta-9 THC, then that's included. Our rule said that you couldn't manufacture, process, or sell smokable products. Again, the department got enjoined in a lawsuit. Specifically, the language in the statute says you cannot manufacture or process smokable hemp products in the state of Texas. The lawsuit allowed the sale of smokable products in Texas. So that's the status where we are with consumable hemp products. And again, with other ingredients being added in, we can't enforce that. We can enforce the cap on 0.9, or Delta-9, 0.3%. Beyond that, we still maintain that other THCs and Delta-9 above 0.3 are controlled substances and then could be controlled and enforced by DPS. Just to get a little bit quickly into the program, We have a license for those that manufacture and process hemp products, consumable hemp products, and then we have a registration for those that sell the products. We also, since it is regulated as a food, we have authority for wholesale distribution warehouses. Those dealers must have a license with the department as a wholesaler of food products for the basically the warehousing. If they store the food product, they must comply with food safety requirements. We have inspectors that inspect both the manufacturers and
Get a little closer to the microphone as you pull.
Yes, sir.
Just you can pull it closer to you if that's easier. Go ahead.
We have
don't wanna miss it.
inspectors that inspect both the manufacturers and the retail registrants for hemp products. And then we have authority to test the products. I'll cover testing a little bit with the laboratory testing. We have a contract with a university laboratory to provide that testing. They break down the testing in 4 different groups. So Delta 9 is one family of tests that we focus on. Again, since we're enjoined and can't enforce anything on other THCs, we don't invest testing on Delta 8 and other THCs that might be in the product, just Delta 9. We can test for pesticides, heavy metals, and other bacterial contaminants. So those 4 groups of tests. We can spend a lot of money on testing in a hurry, $350 per family of tests. And so for one sample, if we test for all 4 categories, it's $1,400. So we don't tend to invest a lot of state resources in that. We tend to rely on testing. We rely on the ag department does testing on the product in the field. Again, the 0.3% Delta 9. The manufacturer has to test the product, each batch or lot, and provide certificates of analysis for the testing that they do. That follows the product all the way through the process to the retail store. And at the retail store, the consumer should be able, by rule, to access the certificates of analysis. Most of the time, those are done digitally through QR codes and barcodes, but they could be provided in paper, hard copy. So again, those certificates of analysis focus primarily on the Delta 9 THC. Just again, a little bit by the numbers, 642 licensed manufacturers, 3,633 registered hemp stores, but a registrant may have more than one location. So a total of 7,082 retail locations across the state. There's when we started the program, we got 4.2 FTEs to cover the state. 2 of those helped with licensing. The other 2 inspectors covered the state, and 0.2 of a manager to run the program. We were able to add inspectors as the fees generated revenue, and so in 22 we hired 2 more sanitarians to cover the state, and that brought our total to 6.2. And just this year we have authority through the fees that have been raised to add another 6, and we're in the process of hiring 6 more sanitarians. So that'll be 12 folks to cover the state.
And I don't want to interrupt, but I guess I do because I am. Briefly, sanitarian, so like so that's an inspector. That's like a milk inspector is a sanitarian. Is that like a sort of a job classification? So when we say sanitarian, that's someone who's inspecting the manufacturing, retail, everything.
Both of those, yes, sir.
Okay.
Basic skill set of a sanitarian, again, it is a food, consumable hemp product, and so that skill set of looking at sanitation, food labeling, it's the same basic job skills that they would use for a retail food operation or a manufactured food operation.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
And I'm nearing the end of my comments, sir. So with that staff that we have, right now we can get to every place in Texas. It takes us about 5 years to get there the first time. We don't do a pre-inspection, so they get a license, registration, they start. If we get a complaint, we put them up higher on the list and would go to those, but otherwise we get to places randomly as we can, so that's about 5 years. With the staff that we're adding, if we anticipate basic status quo, as one might expect, we had a rapid growth of number of manufacturers the first year and second year, and then it has mostly leveled off 2%, 8% growth. We tend to be slightly upward growth, but you could consider it a plateau. If we anticipate that most recent trends, with the new inspectors that we hired, we'll be able to get to places about every 3.7 years. And again, if there are complaints, we'll go to those more frequently earlier in the process, but it'll take us a while to get to places based on our staff. I think I'll stop there, subject to your questions.
Thank you very much. We normally walk through the complete panel and ask questions, but I want to ask, if the committee and you will allow, I want to ask a couple of threshold questions. By the way, thank you. That was a very helpful overview. Those numbers are really important to us. Because I'm kind of slow, walk us through one more time. What is Delta 8? What is Delta 9?
It's all tetrahydrocannabinols, THC, same chemical structure, if you will, in terms of number of carbons, hydrogens, oxygen molecules. The only difference is the location of one double bond on the carbon between the carbon 9 and carbon 8. So that's a Delta 8 and Delta 9. Again, very similar chemical structures. There is a slight different shape because of that double bond and the place that it is, but it still binds to receptors in humans and animals. I could just cover a little bit about CBD, cannabidiol, which was a very common product when hemp was legalized in a lot of states through the Farm Bill. Turned out to be a large supply of cannabidiol. Manufacturers could take cannabidiol and in the process of heat, a catalyst, and solvents, they could convert cannabidiol into Delta 8 quite readily, and also some Delta 9 comes out of that process. If you look at the chemical structure for cannabidiol, you just cleave off a hydroxyl group and close the ring, and you have Delta 8. So it's a very easy and functional precursor to Delta 8.
And we'll all have questions for you shortly. Thank you for that. Doctor, introduce yourself. Give us your testimony.
First, I'd like to thank you for having the chemist before me. No, howdy, Chairman Hughes and members of the committee. My name is Robert Emick, and I am an emergency physician from Austin. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Texas Medical Association, Texas Pediatric Society, and the Texas Public Health Coalition. I have worked in the emergency department for 34 years, and there, unfortunately, we do not split up Delta 8 and Delta 9. To us, it's all THC. And I can tell you that when the ER patients presenting due to a THC ingestion can be broadly broken down into three categories. One, pediatric patients who have accidentally overdosed on a grown-up's THC product. Two, patients who present in an acute psychosis due to THC. And three, chronic users of THC who present with cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. Over the years, Texas has seen an increase in THC-related poison center calls, many of which have been children after an accidental ingestion of THC. This has led to children being sent to the emergency department where I see them, and a number of them being admitted to the hospital, and even if some being admitted to the ICU for advanced care, and at times intubation and respiratory support. Studies have shown that THC consumption by children and adolescents can cause serious neurologic, behavioral, and/or respiratory issues. It is important to note that the 0.3% THC concentration limit that is often cited was initially chosen in the 1970s to distinguish between high and low THC cannabis plants. This concentration threshold is not based on clinical guidance regarding the safety of consumption, addiction, or intoxication patterns. We need and ask for research in this area to determine the health implications of consuming products with varying THC concentrations. Additionally, THC can negatively impact and interact with prescriptive medications by either reducing the prescriptive medication's efficacy or in combination causing other serious health issues. There is a study that shows that interactions with such medicines as warfarin can cause increased bleeding, or with central nervous depressants and symptomatic can cause additive effects causing somnolence or unresponsiveness, and clozapine and azanilipine, which are antidepressants, where you can have reduced efficacy. This is particularly a problem that we see in the emergency department because people may be using THC to self-medicate as an adjunct to try to stabilize a mental health concern and have an adverse effect because of it. I bring up these concerns not to diminish programs such as the Compassionate Use Program, which is based on research and is done in a controlled environment at the direction of a trained physician. To protect Texans, we recommend the following. Give the Department of State Health Services jurisdiction over all consumable hemp products to assess product safety and to close exploited loopholes. Establish safety monitoring strategies and research to detect health outcomes of the THC use. Ensure that all THC products are appropriately labeled with the total THC concentrations, not only Delta 9, and that other active ingredients be listed also. And that we should continue to invest in a robust product laboratory testing system with funding to ensure state and federal compliance and the ability to detect contamination of any harmful chemicals and heavy metals, and ensure that a product is accurately portrayed on the product packaging. I could talk about the pediatrics, or I could talk about the paranoid psychosis, but instead what we mainly see most frequently in the emergency department is the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And so I'll just give a quick example of that. I was in another state working where it is legal to have marijuana and cannabis products. And there were these two gentlemen at about the same time that came in, not together, not related, but they each kind of presented the same pattern, that initially when we would see them, they would have their severe abdominal pain and nausea, vomiting. They would require admission for IV antiemetics to help with their nausea, vomiting, and to help, they would require narcotics for their abdominal pain. We would do that, and it would be over several days. And the interesting thing was that with both of these gentlemen, when we first saw them, they refused to think that it was the THC or the cannabinoid that was causing this. And so we would work with them. We'd try to get counseling and such over time. One of the interesting things was that when the hospitalists would go around to make daily rounds, they would find the patients often in L&D and postpartum in the hot tub. And through the internet and through studies, we've found that there was another symptom, that they got relief of their symptoms with the hot tub. Strange, I don't have an answer. But after 5 or 6 years, both of these gentlemen realized the issue, and they both quit the THC consumption on a daily basis. One went into bodybuilding, one into rodeo, and neither of them had another episode of the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. That is that they come in 6 times a year, and then that's for about 4 or 5 years, and then they tend to recognize an issue, have help, and then don't have the symptoms anymore. Thank you. In closing, our focus is to protect our patient from acute harm and poisoning. We thank you for the opportunity to provide the invited testimony.
All right, thank you. We'll have questions for you in a moment. Thank you very much. Major, thank you for being here. Introduce yourself and give us your testimony.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman. Vice Chair Paxton, thank you. Members, I appreciate you allowing me to be here today, but most importantly, I thank you for what you do. My name is Mark Melson, and I'm a major with the Texas Department of Public Safety Criminal Investigations Division. I once again want to thank you for allowing me to be here and giving me this opportunity to speak about intoxicating hemp products in Texas and the challenges that DPS, Highway Patrol troopers, and special agents currently face. Notably, there is a lack of clarity in current law related to baked goods, vapes, gummies, oil, and smokable products made with cannabis derivatives. And currently, there are no roadside presumptive field tests available that distinguish between illegal marijuana, legal hemp, or Delta-8. Drug sniffing canine are unable to make the distinction between hemp and marijuana. And from an officer's perspective, it is not possible to make a distinction between legal and illegal based on sight and smell. Texas DPS is committed to maintaining public safety by serving and protecting law-abiding citizens, as well as enforcing drug possession and trafficking laws. I'll keep that intro short, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Commissioner, thank you. I have some questions for each witness, but I want to yield to the other members first. Senator Perry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Specifically to Mr. Stevenson, the court case that's pending, I'm going to make a statement if this is the reason that you're kind of at a stalemate. It's because Delta-8 was not specifically addressed in the statute, and it kind of came about through some cute chemists in the industry that decided they could be smarter than what we were trying to do, and obviously they were. They've had their way for a while. But is that the reason we're stuck, is the statute did not address Delta-8 specifically?
Yes, sir, that or a cap over all THCs, language like that probably would have made it easier for the court to make that decision.
So with statute, we can clean this mess up that the industry chose to do. I was the author of the hemp because of the Farm Bill. It was meant to give agriculture a new product for the market, specifically in the fiber market. And as predicted, when I passed that, I said, if you guys screw this up by being cute and getting people high from it, there will be consequences. And we've tried for several sessions to come up with the magic formula. I would argue, or I would state, Mr. Chairman, don't chase the chemistry. It's probably simpler than that, and maybe CUP program comes to mind. But I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised that we are here today, because clearly it was foretold this could happen, and now we've got people getting high off of something in Texas that we have said we don't do, and it's by virtue of very cute industry making a lot of money at people's expense. So I hope we fix this. It's time. It's past time, actually. And you're going to have a whole lot of arguments why you shouldn't, but I will tell you we should. And to that point, Delta-8 is, you don't, when you enforce or you inspect, because of the court, I guess you don't even acknowledge Delta-8 on premise. You just kind of gloss over that.
Right.
Can you give perspective? Is it the bulk of what's coming out of these retailers now, Delta-8, or a large percentage of it? I mean, is that a fair statement?
The bulk, it would be hard for me to say, but it is quite prevalent. A lot of times, even a combination. I did mention our testing. We've tested about 330 samples. Most all of those we have checked for Delta-9 THC. All of those were acceptable on the Delta-9, save 3 that came the last year in smokable products. So the consumable hemp products are not high on Delta-9, the ones that we've tested.
So the Delta-9's probably working in accordance with legislative intent. Is that a fair statement?
Our testing seems to confirm that. Yes, sir.
You said there were 7,082 retail locations. I was quoted a number, and I don't know that this to be true, but there's a whole lot of unregistered or unlicensed facilities. Is that true or not true?
We get complaints, sir, if someone's not registered. If he's registered and I'm not, sometimes he tattles on me. And so we get a complaint, and then we go check those. There have been a few like that where we found they did not have a registration. It's not a big number.
Okay.
But again, it's complaint driven and what we find in the field when we're out doing surveys.
Okay. To the gentleman in the middle there, the ER doc. So you made a comment that the 0.3 03% was not a magic clinical number. It was just something that was picked arbitrarily back in the 70s.
Yes, sir.
So you're basically saying, I guess probably that shouldn't be our variable, but it is federal, right? That's where that came about. So
It is federal, and I cannot say where I've seen research that shows that it is safe or not safe.
okay, I want to back up real quick, and you may not know this, Stevens. I'm told that a lot of the cannabis-friendly states, those that have legalized pot outside the federal guidelines of illegal, are actually trying to get rid of Delta 8 now. Is that something you're aware of, or something you know? Is that something you can say anything to?
I haven't seen a lot of trends there, sir, that I could comment on.
And then to my enforcement folks, lots of money running through these establishments. Have you seen an element of some of the cartel in some of these suspected problems? Are they beginning to move some of their laundry or some of their money through that? Have you got any indication that they're involved in the trade?
So if I was going to compare Delta 8 or hemp products to another substance that has become illegal, that would be the K2 or the bath salts. And the reason that I would compare those two is because ultimately what happened with the K2 was that the criminal organizations did get involved. There was some actual terrorism-related organizations that were involved. But we haven't seen that necessarily with the hemp and Delta 8 products. I'm not saying that it's not going on, but because of the nature of the way that the laws are written right now and the injunction, we're just not able to enforce and investigate those in relation to the Delta and the hemp.
I don't know which one of you three mentioned it, but the metals and some of the things that some of this stuff's being cut with and manufactured with, that's probably not Texas manufacturers, I'd guess. A lot of this is probably outside the state. Is that true or not true, or do you know?
Sir, we had 5 out of our of all the samples that we tested for heavy metals that were high on lead. I don't have the data to say if those positive on heavy metals on lead were manufactured in Texas.
Okay. Is it fair to say a large part of the product is not manufactured in Texas? Or do we know? Any one of the three?
A significant amount, but I don't have a percentage.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I could go on for a long time, but I would just suggest to you, for those that truly believe that Delta 8 is part of their medical regimen, that we have a policy in the state where it is monitored and prescribed and watched in accordance with those, and the supply chain has integrity where people will not get sicker from it or using it. So if we're going to make legislation, and that becomes an important piece of the conversation, because I know there's a lot of market out there for it. There's a lot of people that do this now. That may be the compassionate use may be the proper place to put it. But I would also suggest don't chase the chemists, because you'll never catch them as we go through this conversation. And let's be a little smarter than the average bear out there on how to shut down the problem that unintentional consequences, although probably foreseen, if I'm honest, and said. If you go back and review testimony, I said it very clearly. We will shut it down if it goes beyond where it needs to be. And it was once said, here's the sad fact. I said that if this gets loose, you will kill the agricultural industry conversation. And truthfully, hemp fiber production in this state and around the country, for that matter, has been undermined by Delta 8s and like conversations, because it's taken the headlines away from a very viable and very lucrative market for agriculture if it wasn't for this conversation, probably.
Thank you, Senator Perry. Senator Menendez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To our Dr. Stevenson, the chemist. Some folks have said that it was never the intention of the legislature to monitor and regulate hemp products. But obviously, since you have promulgated rules and you've got everything you've testified, it is surely knowing you knew that you had the direction from the legislature to monitor hemp products. Is that correct?
Monitor
Monitor the quality, the
consumable hemp products.
consumable
Yes,
products,
yes, sir.
yes. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And so we know that with the passage of HB 1325 in 2019, the manufacturing, the distribution, selling of these products in Texas has been legal and regulated, yet we continue to hear people say that it wasn't the intent to regulate. So what is the approach? And I've heard you say, and I mean, part of me thinks you're saying a little bit tongue-in-cheek, how small the numbers of people you have in order for the magnitude of the situation. But what is the approach you're taking in your agency to promulgate these consumable hemp rules and regulations and that govern these consumable hemp products? What's your approach?
Yes, sir. To try and my title is Consumer Protection, so in all of our programs, and we have numerous, trying to protect the health of Texans as much as we can with the limits of the statutes and what our rules and court systems will allow us to do. It really, this program especially shows the interface of statute, rule, and the court system. As I said, we've been on two fronts, both the smokable products and on the Delta-8 and other THCs. We've been limited by the courts to enforce, if you will, those sorts of programs that get more to the safety of the product.
So with the sheer overwhelming numbers of distribution points, vape shops, head shops, whatever you want to call them, have you done the numbers on what it would take for you to, and then the question would be, if the retail location has gotten so overwhelming, is there somewhere further upstream distribution that you could be testing products to make sure they're safe? Other states have seals that things have been tested, that it's safe. I don't see anything of that kind in Texas. If you go to other states where cannabis is regulated and legal, that people know what they're getting. They know the THC to CBD ratios that they're getting. And that would be, in my opinion, a healthier environment. I'm not sure how you feel.
Absolutely. We focus on the manufacturers primarily. The retail shops, they take a packaged product for the most part and sell it. Sometimes they rebottle it and put it in a different package container. But we do focus on the manufacturers. And as I said, with the testing, I spent a lot of time wrestling with the testing in all of my years with the food industry. It's expensive. It has a place. And as you said, rightfully, Senator, further upstream is probably better, preventing issues in the process, engineering things into the process rather than trying to test them to safety at the end. It becomes cost prohibitive. So we do look at those certificates of analysis at manufacturing.
Yeah, thank you. For our major from DPS, are you prepared to answer, are you familiar with issues with the Compassionate Use Act?
No, sir.
Okay, well, that's a shame because I think that this whole conversation about this Delta-8, Delta-9, some people see it as an alternative. You said earlier that now people are getting high. I'm not trying to be argumentative. People have been getting high in this state for a long time. And the reality is, some people feel that going to a vape shop and buying something, they're buying something that's safe. And the reality is that it's probably safer for them to use a product that's not currently legal in this state. And we need to have a long conversation about that and look at other states' best practices about what's the safest way. If we want to make his life safest, how can we maybe join other states? There are lots of states, even conservative states, that have passed a full medical cannabis program. Of course, there's a recreational use, but the reality is that the only people, it's the same argument y'all like to use about guns. By having laws against this, the only people that are having it are the people who don't care about the law. So we're keeping it out of the hands of, you're a doctor, right, sir?
Yes, sir.
my understanding from pain specialist that one of the best products for nerve pain, better than gabapentin, better than any narcotic, is cannabis. Are you familiar with that?
There are people that would say that. I have not seen the research that confirms it.
I will tell you that I
I mean, anecdotally,
And-
I know people who have anecdotally, but I haven't seen any research studies.
I'll tell you, I've had these conversations with many doctors, and the reason is because I have a very close personal knowledge of someone who's had 2 back surgeries, has 2 fusions, a revision of a fusion, has been put on fentanyl patches, and legal cannabis has helped this person more than any narcotic they've ever had. And so, last question. Doctor, in the emergency room, it pains me to hear of children getting access to any pain whatsoever. But are the numbers disproportionate in terms of what we might call accidental overdosing of cannabinoid products? Are they any more higher than other alcohol or other drugs?
To answer your question honestly, is that if you want to throw alcohol into the picture, then I probably see more cannabinoid. I see very few children exposed to alcohol. It takes a grown-up having a drink available for them to consume.
Right.
But to answer your question, honestly, although they have occurred more frequently than in the past, they are still infrequent. It's your regular prescriptive pill ingestions that you would see more frequently. So it's not the most frequent thing.
So, great point. And so a prescription pill, if it's, let's say, a hydromorphone, which is, the generic name for, I forget the.
But you use the generic name.
Yeah, I did, exactly. But I'm.
You're speaking of oxycodone or codone.
Yeah, no, actually, I'm actually thinking about the other one.
Are you thinking of Dilaudid? Somebody
Dilaudid,
mentioned?
the
Okay,
strongest one, Dilaudid.
hydroxymorphone.
Yeah, hydroxymorphone. So one of those, or, God forbid, I remember the time I accidentally touched a fentanyl patch. I mean, in 2 or 3 seconds, I thought I was going to pass out. This was a used patch that fell in the bathroom, going to pick it up. And so these things are much more intense than any of these cannabinoid products, than narcotics, aren't they?
I would not say, I find it interesting, that you were, succumbed by touching a fentanyl patch for a couple moments because they're a delayed release. But the answer to your question is yes, there are medications that are of more consequence. And the question is do you have zero consequence before, or, near zero consequence before? Although in the body for 21, 28 days, it's usually about 6 to 8 hours of a psychoactive. And when you look at decreased body size and the amount, and that's why I, in my written testimony, have said that, although the Texas Medical Association does not endorse the legalization of marijuana, we do have some safety steps that we mentioned as y'all move forward. And that would include child-proofing the cap, the bottles, non-pediatric type, packaging.
Right.
And there is a just recent study that when you ask the question of the effect, that the THC has a greater effect in paranoid psychosis on children between 12 and 20, and that you cross an intersection at that point where it's not as high. And so that would be suggestive of that y'all look at further things of a 21-year age. But less than that, there are children that with their minds developing, it can be of greater risk.
Right.
But that other medications later in life or earlier may have more risk.
And I guess my point was narcotics tend to have a decrease on your ability to breathe. You can fall asleep, pass out, die.
Yes, sir.
And so this is a controversial subject, but it is a subject that I think we need to just come to the realization that we opened the door. And now that you can't tell the difference, you were telling, I think, sir, the major, you guys, there's the court order, the lack of testing, the dogs can't tell the difference between cannabis and the hemp products. And so therefore, it's almost impossible to prosecute. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, sir.
So in a way, inadvertently, we passed a law that sort of legalized the use of cannabis in the state of Texas.
Mr. Chairman.
That's what it feels like.
Senator Paxton had a question.
So let's be clear, this started with a conversation from a federal farm bill that was focused on fiber more than CBD. And it was going to happen federally anyway. So it evolved up through that. Secondly, to be clear, the other states that you speak to, a large part of them or some of them are now reconsidering and pulling back. Oregon specifically has decided that maybe the path to legalized pot was not the smart thing to do. If you talk to people in Colorado, they tell you it was a mistake. So the history is beginning to be on our side. And the state of Texas has never said they were good with any of this in the sense that pot is going to be a legalized product, be Delta 8 or be it through synthesized smart chemist. So this is not the state inadvertently doing it. We have a clear position on it. So clear that we recognize there possibly is some benefit of alternative medicines, but we regulate it through CUP. And I think that's the proper place for these techniques that you speak to, and for those that find relief in it. We have a path, and arguably, I've heard that it becomes too expensive and it's pretty onerous, and maybe we ought to look at that process a little bit. But to be clear, Texas did not legalize pot, knowingly or unknowingly, in the sense that the direction this started out was a federal farm bill for the benefit of agriculture. And it's been bastardized, as we were fearful it could be. I've not been disillusioned that it could end up here. The fact that it's here now, it's time to fix it. And so, and for those states that have chose to be, again, ahead of this issue in their minds progressively, they're having regrets in removing that. And I think you're going to see a trend there. Now, we may have a federal administration now currently that decides to throw everybody out with the bathwater, and then heaven forbid the employers that have people driving 18-wheelers, we just legalized one more vice to make it more dangerous to be on the roads. That's just one example. But this was a conversation we had in 19. It's sad that, unfortunately, human nature being what it is, we've got here today. But back to my point, if we think it's a needed benefit to those that do use it, then we can have control of where they're getting it and who's administrating it.
At the end of the day, that's what we want, is our consumers to be safe. And at the end of the day, we should, as a state, if it's happening, we should be able to have some control, regulation, make sure people are safe. And so I know there are people, experts in this room that help us with the back and forth on what we can do better. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Vice Chair Paxton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Dr. Stevenson. At the beginning of your testimony, you talked about certain situations where you can enforce and others where you cannot enforce, and certain maybe even legal proceedings that are prohibiting that or interfering with that right now. But when you say enforce, what mechanisms of enforcement are available to you?
If a typical food, as a food product, if it were mislabeled, we can enforce through the violation process and even take it to a state administrative hearing. And so we have that avenue as a food product.
Would that involve fines or?
Yes, ma'am, and potentially revocation of licenses and things like that. For the Delta 9, if it exceeds the cap, then that becomes a controlled substance. Again, that definition becomes so critical. It's hemp if it's under 0.3, If it gets above 0.3 Delta 9, it becomes a controlled substance, and it becomes a law enforcement issue to enforce in that regard. And again,
So you
the
hand over to law
we
enforcement?
notify
in those
law
circumstances?
enforcement. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And this is predominantly, you're talking about dealing with manufacturers?
Both.
Okay. And retailers?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay.
We, with manufacturers, they have their certificate of analyses. I'm not aware of any manufacturers that were producing a product above the 0.3 cap that we had to deal with. Again, we found it in the retail store in the 3 smokable products.
Okay.
But I'm not aware of a manufacturer that exceeded that cap. So then we dealt with any potential food handling, labeling issues with the manufacturers as we would a food manufacturer. And we have those enforcement activities.
And those certificates are
Analysis.
of analysis, those are, I guess, kind of self-reported by the manufacturers.
They must be done by an accredited laboratory.
Okay, so they have to have a third party?
They have to have, that testing has to be done by laboratory specified in the statute, International Standard Organization 17025 or equivalent. 17025 is the primary laboratory accrediting agency, so they have their analysis, certificates of analysis from the laboratory.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. And Dr. Emick?
Yes, ma'am.
And Senator Menendez brought up the issue of, you had mentioned pediatric patients in the ER. So you mentioned kind of, as I heard it, 3 broad categories of the main things that you see.
Yes, ma'am.
Related to this issue: pediatric, predominantly accidental ingestion,
Yes, ma'am.
acute psychosis, and then chronic users.
Yes, sir.
Of those 3, what percentage of the folks coming in are the pediatric cases?
It's a small percentage. I would put it in, at the facility I work at, there's somebody later who works at a pediatric facility, and therefore they see higher numbers of that. The pediatric patients would probably make up 5-10% at the most.
Okay. And how severe is the situation for a child like that comes in? So it may be a small, not a large number, but is it on the scale of 1 to 10?
Okay,
Severity?
usually when you have a child, it's between 1 year to 4 years of age.
Okay.
A toddler who has unknowingly taken the gummy bear or the cookie or the chocolate or whatever. And they are usually somnolent or unresponsive. And at the facilities I work at, we would transfer them to a pediatric hospital or to be observed. And what I did not mention with Senator Menendez was, yes, there are other ingestions that could be more serious or deeply, but if they bring in a patient with a narcotic, I have naloxone. If they bring in a patient with a benzodiazepine, then I have flumazenil. When they bring in a patient that has had a THC or ingestion, I've got time. There is not anything I could give them that will make them come out quicker. And talking, so we, as I said, often if they are unresponsive, they will be unresponsive. We try to avoid intubation. I have not had to intubate a child due to this, but many others have. They may actually have to intubate them in the hospital or the ICU if they continue to become more unresponsive and diagonal respirations where they're not breathing to maintain their respiratory status. And they are usually admitted for, these patients are admitted for at least 24 hours, maybe 5-6 days or longer, depending on how long they're unresponsive and the medicine, the THC is wearing off.
Is that different than the other accidental ingestion
Yes, ma'am.
situations?
Yes, ma'am. In most part time,
Because you can treat those.
I can
those
treat
other-
those, I can watch them for a few hours, and then it becomes a CPS case. And if CPS wants me to admit them, I admit them. And if CPS says, we'll take care of it at home, then we let them go home after a period of observation with normal mental status.
Is there a difference in the long-term effects on a child? Because what we're talking about in some ways, this accidental ingestion is a bigger issue than just the THC products, but you have a way to treat the other things that you don't have available to you with these kinds of ingestions. And is there a difference in the prognosis for the child long-term?
I am not the best person to answer that question. There is a pediatrician who is uninvited, but what usually happens in the emergency department is we admit them and then someone else takes care of them. Do I see them in follow-up with delayed sequelae? No, ma'am.
Okay. One other question, Dr. Emick.
Yes, ma'am.
So you sort of referred to some of your suggestions for regulation or
Yes, ma'am.
whatever sort of legislation we might consider. One of the things that you highlighted was accurate portrayal on packaging. I was just wondering if you could kind of clarify what you mean by that.
Actually, it's, if you look at the packaging, that is, it's bright colors. It is attractive to children and young adolescents, that type of packaging.
Okay. So specifically, that was with relation
To the
to
pediatric.
marketing to children.
Marketing to children, yes.
Would you mind just highlighting for us the specific recommendations that you have for things that go to children? I think at a minimum, we could all agree that children are in a special category with relationship to this. So would you mind just kind of highlighting your specific recommendations?
Yes, ma'am. We left it predominantly within the written testimony, but first would be child-proof containers.
Mm-hmm.
Second would be the no marketing to children, appropriate marketing to adults only. And then thirdly, but most importantly, is we would recommend 21-year age limit if you were to allow for recreational use. And that's actually based on the recent study that showed increased paranoid psychoses from 12 to 20 and then leveling off and not being just equal to the population at 20, 21 going forward.
Because these products affect adolescents differently.
Well, because their minds are still developing, and the neuro linkages are felt to be immature and not fully developed.
So it interferes with the development of their
Yes,
brain.
ma'am.
And that changes their whole future forever.
It could, yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Paxton. Senator Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you all being here today. Thank you for the excellent testimony. I just have one question pertaining here to these pediatric cases. Doctor, when you were visiting a moment ago, Dr. Emick, about accidental ingestion, how frequently is that happening here across the state? Do you have any sense of the scale of that problem?
I would say that it is increasing more than 10 years ago. I don't have an exact number. I should, but I apologize. I did not do my homework in that area.
Ballpark, 500 or more? Less than 500? Less than 100?
I can actually get, this gentleman has data,
Please.
but I have national data.
Okay, thank you.
We have some preliminary data from the Texas Poison Center Network, TPCN. I say preliminary. This is what we were able to pull in a few short weeks. This is not publishable.
Sure.
Peer-reviewed. These are not peer-reviewed data, but
Understand.
9,344 from 2019 to 2024 so far in 24.
Just in Texas?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's compared to 4,443 in the 2014 to 2018 era. These are just folks under 19. We just looked at that aspect of the way some of the data that they have stratified probably goes to 20, less than 20. It's a strange age, 19, but that's what the data that we have. So,
Okay.
2,500 cases approximately in 0 to 5, 891 cases 6 to 12-year-olds, and 2,100 approximately 13 to 19-year-olds.
Thank you for the data. That obviously gives us a sense as lawmakers of the magnitude of the problem. So that was very, very helpful to understand those numbers. Another comment I want to come back to, another question rather, I guess, for Dr. Emick with regard to neuro linkages with regard to these products or any other type of narcotic or opioid. Maybe just from a clinical perspective, if you wouldn't mind just talking about those neuro linkages and the challenges specifically for development and youth. We all know the brain isn't fully developed till the age of 25. But if you just would comment for a moment on your concerns broadly with these classes of product with regard to the youth in particular.
Well, there are three areas that I would be concerned of in how it relates with the neuro linkages and the overall risk to the patient. The first one being the paranoid psychoses and possible increase in serious mental illnesses as such. The second would be the increased risk of seizures with these ingestions, and therefore injury based on seizure. And then lastly, with the respiratory depressant, the need for intubation and the lack of body control with aspiration and other issues that may occur due to a somnolent person without airway control.
Okay. Senator had an interesting comment. No, thank you very much for giving that overview. That was excellent. I want to take the questions in another direction here just for a moment, and I want to ask all three of you to respond, if you would. I, like my colleagues, are very concerned with all of these products broadly in the marketplace for a long time. And my perspective has always been, let's look to see very clear, established, documented science, i.e. white papers, control testing, and so forth, that shows value for any of these kind of substances before they be utilized with any particular type of population. Now, with that being said, I'm particularly concerned with the concept of taking away Delta 8, Delta 9 from our veteran community in particular, because I think the veteran community uniquely, suffering from so many cases of PTSD and so forth, are really seeing unique benefits of some of the capability of the substance. And so I'd love your thoughts, again, different populations, different strata, but I'd love to get your thoughts with regard to safety and effectiveness and your perspectives, all three of you, with regard to these products specific to the PTSD population within our veteran community here in the United States and here in Texas.
As stated, on behalf of the Texas Medical Association, we continue to support the compassionate use program.
Okay.
And that we believe, just as you stated, there should be more research. There are going to be a number of people who are going to probably talk to you about all the benefits. And there are some good studies, but most is anecdotal or observational. And what we would like to see are good IRB reviewed, controlled studies that show the benefits and the risks. And that's what we support, is taking care of the patients.
Very good. Thank you. You're not supposed to comment on that.
From a veterinary background, looking at pharmacology and the way drugs are tested and brought onto the market and things, it is an interesting consideration, if you will. Typically, they go through trials and they're released based on their level of safety.
Yes.
I'm not aware of rigorous testing on Delta 8 and other sorts of THCs. And right now, as I said, we're joined in the lawsuit, so we can't control those. They are readily available in consumable hemp products. They could be in the compassionate use program. And so where those things settle out is worthy of study and thought.
Very good. Thank you. Doctor?
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. The way that I would respond to that is by saying, from the perspective of the Texas Department of Public Safety, I'm sure you're aware that our Regulatory Services Division has the compassionate use program.
Absolutely. I've been doing a great job with it.
Yes, sir. And while I can't speak specifically on that division's behalf, what I can say is that's based on clear legislation and certainly clear science. So from the overall perspective of the Department of Public Safety, what we look for is to serve and protect the citizens of the state of Texas. And in order for us to best do that, we have to have a clear definition of what's legal so that we can serve and protect those citizens that are abiding by the laws, and what is not legal so that we can invest those criminal acts and those defendants can be brought to justice.
Absolutely. You need clear guidelines for those that are in the compassionate use program, right? And we have that today.
Yes, sir.
But with regard to these products, we need to have the further discussion. But I just wanted to kind of get your perspective, and it was great to kind of have you go one by one and talk about the compassionate use program, one, and the uniqueness of that veteran population, where some of what I've seen certainly shows it to be very beneficial. And I guess one more question along those lines, Dr. Emick, with regard to an IRB. You talked about an IRB, an institutional review board, for people that aren't familiar, and familiar obviously with the clinical practices going through traditional FDA discovery, right? So 1A trying to do efficacy, to 1B to get the 2A, to ultimately get to 3 to come to market, all those kind of things. But my perspective is, how would you judge or define an appropriate IRB? I mean, in terms of the parameters of an IRB, what would you like to see in an IRB to give the Texas Medical Association comfort on a product?
I mean, when you say, I am used to all academic institutions having an IRB that have proper, they have rules, they have requirements. If you have an academic institution, I know a number of people who were talking about that they are undergoing studies in Dallas or Houston, that those are probably IRB reviewed and they wouldn't occur. And even the hospitals I was at that did not have academics still had an IRB to review cancer studies and such when medications would be used. So I think that anything that is officially established, I don't have it, you know.
So you don't put a criteria on a particular IRB study, one versus the other, as long as if it's an IRB study, if it's with I guess an institution of higher learning or what have you, that as long as they're following a protocol that's recognized by some IRB, then you're sufficiently satisfied from a Texas Medical Association perspective.
Yes, sir.
I just want to understand that from
Yes.
getting kind of a level set with regard to what you view standardization or quality to look like. So, okay. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Thank you very much for being here, gentlemen.
Senator Parker, thank you. Senator Perry.
Real quick, on respect to research and white papers and studies that have been done, and if I'm wrong on this, tell me I'm wrong, but is it fair to say that in the THC realm, we have lots of clinical data and studies on the impact and the effects on those that use, and would they be something we could migrate to in absent of, or do we need to do separate Delta 8 / synthetic / derivatives of CBDs and cannabis stuff? So my point, I guess, is we're asking for research. It doesn't exist on Delta 8. There's some anecdotal white paper or one-offs or examples where people believe they're better, and they may be, truthfully. But is it fair to say that the research exists today with respect to impacts of THC, good and bad, in an industry out there that has been peer-reviewed? I mean, Is that a fair comparison or not? Do we need to go and do our own independent studies specific to these products? Or is it fair to say that we have enough background of THC and research and impacts and development of adolescents and some of the reasons some of these states are looking at them and removing that legalization of it? I mean, isn't there data out there or not? Tell me yes or no in your opinion.
My answer would have to be at this time, no.
Okay, so we do need to research a product that's in wide distribution for its legitimacy in the way of benefits or not. And then if it is beneficial, work it to a form of where we can control quality as well as impact for those people that seek to do it. We don't, in your humble opinion as a medical professional, you don't have that data today.
I do not.
Okay, fair, and that's a great answer. I just assumed that THC is THC. So that's a layman's perspective, but I appreciate the honesty, and we may need to move on research and pull it out of the market until we get there.
Senators, any other questions for the witnesses? Thank you each for being here. Dr. Stevenson, I have one question. And by the way, when Senator Perry kept saying, don't chase the chemist, that wasn't personal. I hope that wasn't. But I want to ask.
I just say, as a chemistry person of one time in high school, it left an impression on me to know I am not one. So.
I want to ask something, and I believe you answered this, and forgive me for not taking better notes. We understand on Delta 8, there's some litigation. I think you said the Department of State Health Service is under an injunction. Is that correct?
Temporary injunction, yes, sir.
Thank you. And if you've spoken about this, let's talk about it again anyway, so we all get it. When was that lawsuit filed? How long have you been under this injunction? Ballpark.
2021, late 2021. I believe it was filed in November. We received the temporary injunction on or about November 8th, 2021.
Okay.
And again, it's still ongoing.
Okay. And so I realize that you're not the lawyer for the Department of State Health Services. Do you have a sense for who the parties are, who sued, what that's about? You talked about it a little bit, but if you don't know, that's okay. But anything you know about that, we'd like to know.
I just know the plaintiff is Sky Marketing.
Okay. And do you know who that is? Or what?
Yes, sir.
You don't have to go look it up. It's not just beyond the scope of your training, your education, which is most impressive. I just wanted to know in case you knew.
I have it here.
I don't
yes,
know.
Sir. Sky Marketing, doing business as Hometown Hero, create a CIG Temple, LLC, Daryl Sarif, and David Walden.
And so the case has been pending for a couple of years and
Went through district court and is now in the queue for Texas Supreme Court.
Supreme Court. Okay, thank you. Some of that came up, but I wanted to make clear because that injunction kept coming up. I want to make sure. Members, any other questions for this panel? Thank you, Dr. Stevenson, Dr. Emick, Major Melson. Thank you all for being here. You are excused. Now we're going to call up 3 more witnesses, and then we will open public testimony. And so the chair calls Brady Mills, Dr. Peter Stout, Nico Richardson. If you can sit in that order, if not, we'll move your nameplates around. But we'd have Brady Mills right here on the end, Dr. Stout somewhere in the middle, Nico Richardson over here on this side. And while they're taking their places and they're sitting up, let me, by way of road mapping for the benefit of those watching and those who are going to participate, again, we will hear public testimony on each of these charges. Now, the way we do this, we look at the charge that has the most witnesses, and we take that one first, and then we take the one with the next number of witnesses. We move through there. So just so you'll know, so that means that after we finish testimony from these 3 witnesses and we finish the questions, we're going to stand at ease for only about 5 minutes because our expert technical people need to make a couple of changes up here. So we're just going to have a stand at ease for about 5 minutes, get this ready, then we'll begin calling public testimony. We'll be taking public testimony on the Delta 8 and 9 charge first, then on the elections, and then on the land questions. So be aware of that. If you're waiting to testify, that may help you order your schedule. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, gentlemen, but public testimony, which is very important, be aware. We'll take a 5-minute recess after this panel. Not a recess. We'll stand at ease for 5 minutes, and then we'll hear public testimony on the Delta 8 and 9 charge, then on the elections charge, and then on the land charge. Hope that's clear to everyone. And
Thanks, sir.
give them time to get the water spread out. That's good. That's there for a reason. And often witnesses don't use it. Somebody was showing some leadership, I guess. All right. Thank you very much. Welcome. Mr. Mills, introduce yourself and give us your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Brady Mills, and I serve as the chief of the Texas Department of Public Safety.
Pull that mic a little closer.
My name is Brady Mills, and I serve as the chief of the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Laboratory Division. I am on the charge, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak today to discuss the complexities faced by crime laboratories across the state concerning cannabis and THC-containing products. Our role in this is, as materials are brought to our laboratories as the largest forensic service provider in the state of Texas, is to try to determine if a controlled substance is present. So then we can report that to law enforcement and then to prosecutors that ultimately handle these cases. As part of our legislative appropriations request, the laboratory identified legal impediments related to cannabis testing. We have shared them with the Texas Association of Crime Lab Directors, which it's my understanding they're included in Dr. Stout's written testimony that you have received this afternoon. These revisions to existing statute are to mitigate the impact of cannabis product testing in forensic laboratories and to allow clarity in the law regarding these products. Our impediments, if moved into enrolled into change statute, do not allow consumable hemp products to contain any isomer or derivative of THC other than the 0.3% Delta 9 as defined by the Health and Safety Code. So this does include prohibiting Delta 8. The vast majority of the impact of laboratories is on our seized drug teams around the state, but it's also essential to consider the impact of cannabis on our toxicology testing program, especially in cases involving driving under the influence. Approximately 40% of our drug toxicology cases we test today test positive for THC. Our primary responsibility is to provide scientific analysis and support the legal definitions in criminal cases. The changes to the definitions of marijuana a few sessions back have challenged our ability to support the courts here in Texas, as different courts have interpreted the law differently. Inconsistencies and gaps in different counties and courts create uncertainty regarding testing requirements across the state for our chemists. The laboratory must allocate our limited resources, which there's not a great capacity there, to try to meet the needs of the different prosecutors around the state. Historically, marijuana testing was straightforward. We identified the plant by plant structures or performed color tests to detect THC or cannabinoids. With the change in hemp legislation, this changed the testing process radically for our laboratories. The changes require the laboratory to test misdemeanor cases now, because those results cannot be obtained from law enforcement professionals. There's no roadside testing at this point. We also have to develop quant methods for plants, liquids, oils, and edibles. If changes were made to not allow consumable hemp products to contain any isomers or derivatives of THC other than the Delta 9 as defined by the Health and Safety Code, the laboratory would have the ability to develop a test method to test specifically for the other THCs, the non-Delta 9s. And this would allow for a more streamlined testing strategy and consistency across the state for us to support prosecutors. In conclusion, understanding the complexities of the forensic laboratories is crucial as we navigate the evolving landscape of cannabis legislation. So thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. And as we've done previously, we'll go on and hear everyone on the panel, and then we will take questions from the members. So, Mr. Stout, thank you for being here. Will you please introduce yourself and give us your testimony?
Hi, my name is Dr. Peter Stout. I am the head nerd of the laboratory that serves the city of Houston. I am also the president of the Texas Association of Crime Laboratory Directors. So I guess I'm the nerd for the nerds in the state. I've got a big old thick package for you that I've tucked a number of things in there to try and give you some ideas around what cannabis testing used to be for laboratories, what it is now, also to try and give you some structure of this blizzard of acronyms that go with all things cannabinoid. I've also got a paper in there that we published, actually, DPS, us, the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences, and Sam Houston all went together to try and develop a method for us to be able to test stuff in the laboratories, and there's a publication of that. So there's a bunch of stuff in there. So I'm from the crime laboratory perspective on this. We never show up on anybody's good day. It's always a bad day when we show up in your life.
Except today.
Except today. To be really,
It's just disturbing.
yeah, but my wife hates taking me out because I can suck the air out of any room. You know, we don't see the responsible products. So our perspective on this is all of the stuff where somebody's done something dumb, and that's, you know, to be really clear about it's. I am not nearly smart enough, and I don't envy all the task of trying to divide between what could be really promising use for cannabinoids and hemp fiber and all of these really good uses, and the dumb stuff we see. We get the dumb stuff. But hemp used to be, and marijuana used to be, one of the simplest tests for us. It was something that took us minutes and dollars to do. Like Brady was saying, we looked at it under a microscope and put pictures in there of what the stuff looks like. We identified structures on the plant that made it cannabis sativa, the plant. And then we stuck a couple chemicals on it that turned purple. If there were cannabinoids of any sort there, we're done. Minutes and dollars. After the Federal Farm Act, and this has happened all over the country, so this isn't just something that's happened here in Texas, that testing now went to be something that takes us hours and hundreds of dollars for one test. Most of the stuff we get, we're going to have to do multiple tests in it. I get stuff that comes through Houston airports. It's hundreds of pounds of green leafy material. I'm going to be into that for probably tens, if not hundreds of tests, each of which cost me hundreds of dollars. A case like that, I can be into it for tens of thousands of dollars easily in the testing on that. So it gets really expensive for us doing this. And the article that I put in there, again, keep in mind, we're getting the dumb stuff. We're getting the stuff that's not the responsible products. What we see when it comes to us as green leafy material, 97% of the time it's pot. It's over, and we test over under 1%, just as a safety threshold on the 0.3%. It's all pot. But we do really expensive testing to get to that. Also keep in mind, for forensic laboratories, like Brady said, it's not just the solid dosage materials that we have to deal with. We've got to deal with this in the toxicology standpoint. So that's after somebody has taken it, then they're out there driving, something awful happens, and now we have to try and sort out, did it contribute to the accident? Did it not? What does it mean? What's called medical legal death investigation. You've got somebody dead, they've got these compounds on board. What does that mean? And trying to sort that out. So the circumstance that we have of the lack of clear definition around all of these other compounds that are not Delta 9, I really don't know what they mean. And one of the things, so I did include in there, like Brady mentioned, the suggestions that we've got for changing in the code. And this is from our perspective of the laboratory trying to make stuff easier for us, is the more qualitative the analysis is, the more we're back towards something that is, yep, it's just got cannabinoids there, makes life a lot easier for us. And the difficulty, if you think about for the labs, every lab in the state is underfunded. Every lab in the state has some version of backlog. So anything that goes to making the testing more complex and more costly means the resources have to come from something. So y'all want me to be testing marijuana materials, or do you want to be testing pills that kill people or sexual assault kits? I only have so much money. And if I put it over there, I don't have it for that. So in whatever the structure is from the laboratory's perspective, irrespective of all the other stuff, our concern is that there is an understanding of the impacts of the forensic laboratories because we can't keep up with what's there right now. The change from the federal legislation blew us up. Before, and I mean, Senator Perry, we've talked about this some and the impacts of the laboratories. Before House Bill 1325, my turnaround time was 7 days. Now it's about 120. And that's an outgrowth of having to deal with this difference in complexity of testing. So I'm happy to answer questions. There's a ton of stuff in here. Tried to give you a framework of some of the legislative things from the laboratory's perspective and how we deal with that complexity of testing. But thank you, and I appreciate the time today.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Stout. There's a little styrofoam cup hiding your title from me, so I apologize
Oh, it's quite all right.
for not addressing you properly to start with. Thank you for your testimony. Nico Richardson, introduce yourself and give us your testimony. Thanks for being here.
My name is Nico Richardson, and I am the CEO, and I'm here representing Texas Original Compassionate Cultivation. Thank you to the Senate State Affairs Committee for having me here today and for giving me the opportunity to testify. We are the largest operator in the Compassionate Use Program, which is Texas's medical cannabis program. We have been serving critically ill patients here in Texas for the past 7 years. Prior to my current role, I worked for 10 years in the highly regulated medical cannabis markets. I was on the team that launched Tilray. It's the first industrial medical cannabis company in Canada, and we're also the first medical cannabis company at IPO on the NASDAQ. We were regulated back then by Health Canada and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, so I have ample experience working in highly regulated and new markets. Today, I'm here to talk to you about the opposite end of the regulatory spectrum, which is the intoxicating hemp market here in Texas and its impact on the compassionate use program and Texas citizens. The intoxicating hemp industry in Texas has been marketed as something that's legal, safe, and capable of self-regulation. However, many hemp products are highly intoxicating, more potent than what's offered in the medical CUP program here, and dangerously under-regulated at this point. Intoxicating hemp is nearly identical to medical marijuana with the same effects. Consumable products sold in the hemp industry are largely the same and often far more potent in certain formats than what is allowed in the CUP. Delta-9 THC, which we've been talking about, is Delta-9 whether it is derived from hemp or whether it is derived from marijuana. It is the exact same molecule with the exact same effect on the end consumer. An example of this would be a medical marijuana gummy from our program would be 1 gram and have a 10 milligram dose in it. In order to have the same dose in the hemp industry, you just have to increase the size of that gummy to 3.2 grams. The effect is exactly the same on the end person. Additionally, the consumable hemp industry sells smoking and vaping products far above the 0.3% THC threshold by using other intoxicating molecules that are not listed in the hemp bill or the 2018 Farm Bill. There are at least 10 intoxicating cannabinoids that we know of today, and only one is regulated in Texas currently, which is Delta-9 THC. Under earlier testimony, you guys were asking what the most prevalent product is in the market, in the hemp market today. It's probably THCA flower is what we see the most of right now. No one mentioned that. We were talking a lot about Delta-8. THCA is basically just marijuana. THCA is the precursor to Delta-9, and we talk about it here. But this is the most recent loophole molecule. It's marketed as hemp, but nearly every THCA product sold in Texas, at least that we have seen, contains illegal amounts of Delta-9 THC. THCA converts into Delta-9 when exposed to heat, so when you light it on fire, or simply with the passage of time. By the time THCA products have actually been transported into Texas to the stores where they are sold, the product has likely already been converted to Delta-9 above the federal limit of 0.3%. So we've conducted time studies on our own flower, and if you test our flower, we can show that about 3% of the THCA converts to Delta-9 THCA over the course of a month. So within, call it 15 days, if you're starting at 0 Delta-9, which is probably not the case most of the time, within 15 days of that product sitting in a stable environment, it's probably already converted about 0.3% over to Delta 9 THC, from our estimates. Delta 8 was the other molecule you were talking about. Delta 8 THC is chemically derived compound. It's produced by washing CBD with an acid to produce a compound nearly identical to Delta 9 with very similar psychoactive effects. There are no restrictions on the amount of THCA or Delta 9 that can be sold to anyone in Texas, including minors. Most intoxicating hemp products come from out of state and lack accurate testing today. While the number of hemp dispensaries has exploded, hemp grown in Texas has actually waned. This downward trend in Texas grown hemp is partly due, we believe at least, to the fact that Texas products cannot be sold as smokable hemp. We talked about the language discrepancy there earlier. Imported hemp products, however, can be sold as smokable hemp in Texas. So most of that THCA flower, if not all of that THCA flower, is actually coming in from places like Tennessee and Oklahoma. The acreage of hemp grown in Texas reached its zenith in 2021, yet the number of hemp retail registrations has grown from the numbers we have are 1,948 in 2020 to over 7,000 most recently in 2024. To put that in perspective, California's regulated marijuana industry only has about 1,650 retail licenses in the entire state of California and a full regulatory body to deal with that, not 6 people. One of the big problems with imported hemp from out of state is that our state regulators have no jurisdiction over out of state labs and therefore no ability to verify test results. What is listed on those out of state certificates of analysis rarely comports to what's actually in the product from what we've seen. Hemp licenses only need to provide the COA if asked by the Department of Health and Human Services. And with more than 7,000 retailers and thousands of out-of-state products being shipped into Texas every day, it's near impossible to confirm the accuracy of out-of-state lab results. By comparison, under the CUP, licenses must test every single batch of medicine and provide those results to the DPS every single month on monthly inspections. Patients are leaving our medical system now for unregulated products. So the CUP has been a life-changing resource for patients in need in Texas. Unfortunately, starting in 2022 and rapidly accelerating in 2023, we have seen our active patient base dramatically decline, basically cut in half. This trend is perfectly juxtaposed with the exponential increase in recreational hemp licenses across the state. When we ask our patients and doctors their reasons for leaving the program, one of the most prevalent answers we receive is that patients are still consuming marijuana, but they're doing it from a cheaper source, the hemp industry. On average, 90% of our patients leave the compassionate use program after 1 year, so that's our churn rate. There are 3 primary reasons we see. One is accessibility. The regulatory burden has greatly hampered accessibility in the CUP. CUP licenses can only store our inventory at one single location in the state of Texas, one central location. Patients either must wait to be put on a delivery schedule or drive up to 2 to 3 hours from their house to go find a pickup location that works for them. By comparison, the hemp industry can store nearly identical products out in the open at any location, including near schools. 2 is product formats. Patients are looking for product formats that are not available to them in the CUP, but are available without restriction in the hemp industry. Senator Perry, you talked a lot about Delta 8 and wondering whether or not there's efficacy around that molecule and whether we should be exploring that. Part of the reason Delta 8 is so attractive is that there's no 0.3% threshold on it. And because of that, they can actually sell it in an inhalable format, which you can't do with Delta 9 anywhere in the state. That's the real reason Delta 8 is so popular. 3 is price comparison. So while we consistently have driven medicine prices down over the last 2 years, it would be impossible to match rock bottom prices associated with zero regulatory burden that the hemp industry has. So while we're required to grow medical cannabis in a high security indoor environment, test every single batch, drive that medicine back and forth across the state of Texas, hemp retailers can buy THC extracted from large farms in North Carolina, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and drop ship those products into retail establishments across the state of Texas. Unfortunately, very unfortunately, due to these reasons, there is a pretty high likelihood that our medical program will not continue to exist in the coming years. It is not an economical program for the operators. Intoxicating hemp products do not undergo the same growing, manufacturing, testing, and approval processes that the CUP requires. Right now, at least 27 states have already passed regulations banning or severely restricting the sale of intoxicating hemp products. However, in Texas, unfortunately, it's still legal for a teenager to buy a highly intoxicating hemp product across the street from their high school. That sounds like hyperbole. If you go 2 miles down the street here, you can go to Lively Middle School. There's a vending machine across the street. If you go another 3 miles down to Crockett High School, there's a hemp dispensary 75 yards from the front door. These products are indistinguishable from medical marijuana. The only difference between medical marijuana in this state and intoxicating hemp is that one is heavily regulated and the other is not. So thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator Perry, do you have questions for the panel?
Yes, I
You're
do.
recognized.
Thank you, sir. So back to the chemist, the head nerds. I asked this earlier to more of a regulatory format, but is the complexity science, chemistry, or in that genre, or the statute?
No, it's the statute.
It's the statute.
And
So if the
see-
statute was clarified, you could test, and if there's THC there, it's illegal.
I would be happy with an answer that I at least know what to test.
And it is 40% of your driving under the influence now, was your testimony.
Yeah, that's a DPS number. It's probably not that far off the mark for us in Houston.
So you may not be able to answer it. I think the compassionate use guy probably has a better perspective, but the Delta 9, which is legal under the Hemp Act and under Texas, does it not give them the same effect? Is Delta 9, why was Delta 9 not enough? Is it just greed and profit motivation through
There's probably-
cute? I mean,
Sorry.
no, I'm just asking, I don't know. Evidently they get a different impact from something other than Delta 9. Because Delta 9's legal.
It's not that it's a different impact. The percentage by weight classification that we're applying to this product just changes the delivery mechanism.
So you have to do more of the Delta 9.
It's not that you have to do more. When you ingest it, okay, if I put 0.3% in this cup right here, I could probably put 100 milligrams of THC in that cup, if not more. That's an incredibly high dose. You typically wouldn't, if you had a 20% marijuana flower that they were smoking, it would be less than that. It would probably be like 50 milligrams. So that 0.3% doesn't matter. It just forces you
It's
to.
how you deliver it.
It forces you to digest it.
So Delta 8's delivered differently, therefore you get the impact quicker or easier.
Because Delta 8 is not required to be 0.3%, you are able to sell it in a vapable format.
Let's
So, yeah.
just say if it was 0.3%, would it be a Delta 9 then basically?
Yeah.
So,
Yes. There's one other reason, which is economic, which is we had a CBD boom in this country after we first legalized hemp in 2018, and we had this huge glut of CBD. It was really entrepreneurial chemists, as you guys very smartly brought up earlier, that found a way to alter CBD to turn it into Delta 8. That's when Delta 8 became very popular in the United States, was on the tail end of the 2018 Farm Bill.
and you raised this issue, and I think it's something worth noting. In California, there was actually a documentary on it for a while. When they regulated it in California, guess what happened? All the good guys went broke, the ones that were regulated, and all the bad guys filled the void plus. So there's 1,600 regulated facilities in California. I've heard numbers into the thousands of unregulated in California. So having a cup program as restricted and as monitored as it is prevents that chasm, if you will, if we just kind of gloss over the Delta 8 conversation in regulatory. So we're kind of at that point where it goes back to an all or nothing. Because if we begin to squeeze these guys out, we're going to have the bad guys fill in, and then we have some true legal clarity there that we know what to do with those guys.
Right now, the program is largely I know I shouldn't say
No,
this,
I
but
get it. No, it's not.
largely unregulated. So it's more akin to
It's-
the thousands of
Right.
California unregulated actors that you're talking about than it is to the
I
California.
agree with you, and it's unregulated because people got greedy and found a different way to sell something that people are willing to pay for to get high. I mean, that's truthfully, it's just no different than any other vice. So I appreciate your testimony, and you highlight where Texas wants to be and where we believe we are, and the reality is we're not there. But to be clear, it is the statute and not the chemistry that complicates this conversation.
Yeah, if I may, the last page in my big old packet that I left for you has got a listing of a portion of the cannabinoids that are in THC. So you said don't chase the chemist. From our perspective, please don't chase the chemist, because that's going to make me have to figure out how to do a quantitative analysis on all of
made,
these
'cause
things.
We'll never get there. Thank you.
Senator Passion, and then we'll have Senator Lamontia, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was kind of settling back down, but then something disturbing was said again. And so you mentioned that not far from here, across the street from a middle school, is a vending machine. So it just brings up the question to me, and I don't know that anyone is prepared or able to address this, but what sorts of regulation do we have around proximity to children? And of course, a vending machine wouldn't even require anyone to sell it to them, right? I mean, that's completely a child just walking across and sticking money in, or credit card, debit card, or whatever. So do you have any information on that?
My understanding is that there are no regulations around proximity to school. For the CUP, we have to, and these are prescription pickup locations where you have to have a prescription to even come in and get your medicine. We have to be 1,000 feet from a school or daycare.
I am not aware of that either. So we get calls constantly from prosecuting attorneys around the state asking these questions. And so these are questions that we're not able to answer.
Okay. I think that's something that would be important for the committee to consider, is proximity to schools and other locations where there would be high concentrations of kids, especially without adult supervision.
Thank you, Senator Passion. Senator Lamontia, you're recognized.
Thank you. And on the proximity to schools, like there's rules for alcohol and how close is a place that sells alcohol can be to schools. And so that would be something that we could look at as well. But I did have a question about the cannabinoid test. So if there's any cannabinoids, as like in the picture that you have in the packet, it'll turn purple. Does that include CBD or is that just THC?
It does, and so the testing that we used to do really didn't differentiate any of the cannabinoids.
Okay.
So we would see the same thing if it were, legit hemp. We would basically see the same kind of testing, because hemp and marijuana are the same plant. They're going to look the same under the microscope, and they're both going to give us a purple test. So we wouldn't be able to distinguish hemp from marijuana with that testing in these definitions.
Got it. And CBD, though, is different than THC, right? Because it doesn't have the
Right. It's
high
the one that's
factor?
got so CBD, cannabidiol, has the one open ring that the chemist was talking about. All you got to do is whack off a couple of molecules and it closes that ring to make it delta 8 THC.
Got it. But ingesting CBD doesn't have that high factor that THC and these other
It
items
does
do?
not. So I'm toxicologist by training, which just means I do drugs for a living. But we look at it all from the standpoint of impairment,
Right.
like with driving under the influence of
Yes.
drugs and alcohol. There doesn't seem to be an impairing effect from CBD. Now, whether it's got other psychotropic effects,
We don't know.
above my pay grade. I will say, and I think it was mentioned before, Delta 9 THC is where basically all of the research has been done about effects and impairment and all of that. All of the host of 109 other tetrahydrocannabinols, I don't know. There's basically nothing. So from our perspective, when we're talking about impaired driving and medical legal death investigation, I don't know. And we see these things in impaired drivers, and then we're dealing with prosecutors trying to figure out, well, okay, this person just ran over a kid and killed him. Did that contribute? I don't know.
And then I know a couple years ago, there were a couple people saying that they were working on a breathalyzer type test for roadside impairment.
Yeah,
Is there
they've been
any
trying for a
movement in that?
while. So the difficulty, and this is where alcohol kind of lulled us all into complacency, because alcohol behaves very nicely. Alcohol is volatile, so it's easy to measure on the breath. There's a nice relationship between how much alcohol is in somebody and just how stupid they are. There really isn't that relationship with any other drug in just how stupid are they with how much drug they've got on them, at least from the standpoint of impaired driving. And THC is this big old floppy molecule that doesn't volatilize at body temperature. So trying to analyze for it on the breath is really hard. And while there have been lots of efforts at a roadside equivalent to a breathalyzer, it just hadn't panned out yet. And
Even a blood test can't say if they were high at the time, if they took it days before?
this is one of the really tough problems for us, is even when I've got a blood test and I can analyze for it in the laboratory, it is really difficult to say they had that much THC in their blood, they were X amount of stupid, and it contributed to their accident. It's really tough, and that's with Delta 9. It's because there just isn't that much research around it.
Right, the science isn't there.
And then there's even less for THC-O and P and M and V. And you mentioned about THC-A, tetrahydrocannabinolic acid. There's 5 different ones of those. And yeah, they convert to Delta 9. And right now, if you were to hand me a vape that has no THC-9 in it, but a whole crap ton of THC-A, is that hemp or not? I don't know.
And then I guess my last question is, do you spell marijuana with an H or a J? Because I've seen it both ways, and even in the report, it's both ways. So I'm not sure.
In our fine federal government's history,
Yes.
it got spelled with an H originally, and in Texas code, it's with an H. So officially, it's with an H.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Lamontia. Senator Menendez, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Stout, you know, you touched on something that's very important. We definitely need to know anything that puts that where we could tell people you cannot do this because you can get behind the wheel or operate heavy machinery because you're going to be under the influence, without a doubt. I look forward to the science. I mean, I think that with the declassification or the moving of marijuana to class 3, we'll start to see some studies that might help us with that. But in the meantime, you said that you have 4-month backlog. Is that what it takes? It takes 120 days. Is that what you said?
Yeah, in solid dosage drug testing.
Solid dose drug testing. 120 days is the amount of time it takes you to get back. And how? So let's say we add a bunch more cases. How does that impact the other testing you have to do?
It ain't going to go well.
So
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem in crime labs, that there isn't spare capacity sitting on the shelf. And this is our concern around how this gets decided. We can't keep up right now.
your lab tests for what right now? What does it test total?
Basically, right now, we test green leafy material to
No, I
determine.
mean everything. That you, like
everything. We test across the board. So from sexual assault kits to, digital evidence.
So more of these backlog other crimes that might have.
This is a reality for crime laboratories all across the country and here. We can't keep up with what comes in the door right now. So if there is a new demand that's put on us, it's got to come from someplace. So it forces me to choose, do I test this stuff for marijuana or do I test that sexual assault kit?
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Richardson, my understanding is that currently DPS has some legal license applications that they're evaluating, I think. You've mentioned that part of the reason you've lost doctors and you've lost patients from the system is that they go, well, why, if it's so difficult to maneuver? If Texas had an easier, legal, compassionate use system that would be more convenient for the patient, convenient for the medical provider, do you think you'd be able to, people would then stay within the legal Compassionate Use Act rather than go to a vape shop that they can just find, probably a quarter mile from their house. What do you think? Do you think that would happen?
Yep, thank you for the question, Senator Menez. Certainly, it's one of the factors. So if we increase accessibility of the program to patients, we will see less churn from that. That comes from a host of different areas. You mentioned new licenses. That can certainly happen. There are things that need to be fixed with the program first, primarily inventory storage, being able to store our products where the patients are or closer to the patients rather than having them all centrally located in one place, which is where they are now.
You stated in your remarks that you've worked in this industry in Canada. Have you worked in other parts of the United States as well?
I have.
Is it unusual? I think I find it a little unusual for a compassionate medical use program to be housed within the law enforcement agency. I think other states have it within their Health and Human Services or medical. Am I correct in my assumption? Tell me about other states that you're
Yes,
experiencing.
the majority of other states either have it housed within Health and Human Services, or in certain instances, they'll sort of carve off a piece of their liquor licensing regulatory body and have it done that way. Washington did it that way. It's not without precedent. Canada certainly started sort of dueling regulatory bodies for different pieces of the program under Health Canada and then under their RCMP. And so it has happened in the past, but it's not common.
Which state or country has the best operating medical use program? Easiest to use?
That's hard to say.
Good
Yeah.
cost, safe. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not experts in this, but we know that there are a lot of people who could get a benefit from using this and want to do it in a safe way that's legal.
I'd say Texas is certainly very safe, and our program is a very positive aspect of the program here in Texas. Access is something that needs to be widened, but Texas is incredibly safe and probably one of the safest programs in the country.
But which is great. We want safe, but how good is it if you can't access it?
There is give and take, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Menendez, thank you. Members, any other questions for the witnesses? Thank you very much. You're excused. Thank you for being here.